Okay, this also, we don't have a formal handout for this. It will count as one of our lectures. Okay, very small shade there, but no problem. So one thing I wanted, oh, I need my back, sorry. I'm sorry it's forbidden, but thank you. So you know what is this? This kind of a bicycle lock. The cheap ones you use when you don't want people stealing your bicycle. Okay. If you want to open this, what you do? First option is to know the number, right? That's the usual. This is why it has 4 numbers with 6 possibilities. This is low security thing. If you forget the numbers and you want to use the bicycle, what you do? You cut it. Okay, you go like brute force. You can get some tool somewhere. If you think, well, if this was expensive thing, because some locks are expensive, you would try one by one the numbers, right? And eventually you will get it, right? So both cutting and trying every number, every possibility. How many possibilities? 6 numbers with repetition by 4 by 4. Right. Okay, there's no, but still it will take a few minutes to find it. So that's kind of what we call the brute force. Don't use mind, you don't reason. Eventually you will reach a solution. Of course, this is not a huge amount of possibilities, right? If it is a bit more complex, it might take years for us to find the number, and then we would give up. So that's what we call the way of doing things. If you are experienced, I'm not, but actually those locks are very easy to what they call pick, to just open without a key. So if you have very much experience, you can go there, and there's a moment in which you feel when each of the locks opens, and you can open this maybe in half a minute. Right? So it's not brute force, that's having the technique to open things. So you know how this works, you understand the lock, you know the weak points, and use this and your practice, your training to the advantage. Why do I say this? Because one of the ways of the design we teach in studio is brute force research. And I say we because I'm part of the institution, but there's some kind of work which might make sense at times, but I don't see the meaning of it because it's like doing this, like try many things and hoping something will work. At school, it will be that hopefully your teacher will say, oh, this is okay. But you will always depend on somebody telling you, like, not on you having any kind of intention. This is why I started with Kandinsky. Well, I wanted to show Kandinsky whatever. So anybody should know him and be familiar. Then you can disagree, you can hide it, that's okay. But that kind of the form being the result of the inner spirit of things, not the opposite, not the form being ahead of things. And that brute force is like just finding the form first and then doing the rest. Then you just justify to make this useful or convincing. So let me see if I can share screen. So I didn't make a PowerPoint. So this is the painting of Manet, or Monet, sorry, I was confused, which maybe one of those, because it's a series of paintings, which made one man change his life and the art of the whole Europe, not only him, but one of the big motors to change it. One painting. Also kudos for Monet. By the way, one of our students of this Studio 3 and this same project used one of Monet paintings as an inspiration for the project. The one doing the bathhouse, working with water. Doesn't mean you have to do, but you can. Then we have the brute force. So one thing which makes a brute force one thing we use in every day is computers. And we have, this is like 2 years ago, artificial intelligence algorithm trying to discover new ice cream flavors. Comes like a pumpkin trash break, or peanut butter slime, or strawberry cream disease. So you may think there's a problem with the algorithm, it could be, but this tells you the limitation of artificial intelligence. They have just the flavors, names, and things, and commanding things, and you can put some kind of parameters on taste, color, and naming, but computers have not the concept of taste. So it's like a really ice cream designed by a robot. So these are also possibilities. And this comes this way of treating things. There's no aim, there's like a parameters and the computer starts spitting things. And these were like the best choices, right? Kind of ridiculous. If we go to, okay, I didn't want to show this. Something comes first. So this is what we see very often. This is OMA, and there's like the endless massing studies, which often we ask at school. Next week, bring at least 20 models, 20 massing models. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. And it is usually somebody who studied in Holland or worked with those offices. And that makes sense, because that's one possibility. Of course, if you have a powerful computer, you can break many things, right? And in many problems of mathematics, we are dealing with so huge numbers, we need computers to deal with it, right? We put just the rules. But here, why does it work? Well, it's kind of a posture. So OMA, Office for Metropolitan Architecture, is telling objective architecture, industrially made for a new civilization. So this works because in that office, they have dozens or hundreds of slaves, human brute force. There's a huge amount of people wanting to work for free or even spending money to go with this. And then they're lucky because those guys are very clever. So Kohlhaas is a genius, or if not genius, really much more above average. So there's always the boss or some of the bosses who know where to pick the thing which looks interesting and then move on. And that's the weak point of this. You need that big office and that big training, that big eye to pick the right thing. So it's kind of mixing the brute force and the lock-picking experts together. As a general method for architecture, this is a bit crazy because like you try many possibilities without aim, just hoping, just by coincidence, things will happen. And you see there is, even they look random, there are patterns. So they can try many variations. And some of them may end working or not because at that moment, somebody saw a possibility there. Again, this is starting by the form, and then you stuff the problem inside. Those are great design exercises because when you have the shape ahead, you have to deal with the other parts of the design. But it's not the only, maybe not the best. In our case, we have only partly this solved because we have an existing building. Some of the form is predetermined already, but that building is more than the form. Here, only the form, there's nothing else. So our building is much more than just the abstract mass with some shape. It has some kind of that inner reason, that spirit, more or less spiritual if you want, but it has some reason of being which we have to deal with, not only the form. When I was co-teaching 5th year, we had 2 professors, and I would have hard times with my co-teacher because he would say when the students were already deciding and almost in this stage, or even a bit more advanced, because 5th year you have more experience, he would say, oh, this is too early. Make just 1 to 1,000 scale and make massive models without context, without anything. Why? Because 1,000 scale, you lose the idea of a scale. You work in purely abstract elements, right? Again, halfway of the project doing that, it doesn't make much sense because you already have one direction. Right? It's like telling you, well, probably how navigators work. If you want to go from here to Namsan, we may have some options, but we know we have to go Namsan is where around there, right? So you may find better ways, but we'll go through as Namsan. We'll not try to every single direction in the planet to reach there and then see what is better. So this is the point of showing this. So I think in general, it's more useful to have this, all the factors on the design and have a clear intention so you can follow it. And you don't get lost in formality. Otherwise, we have this problem. If you start designing by massing without having a clear idea of what is the structure, what is the access of a building, what is the space inside, what is the logic of the interior and exterior, what is the context, you're doing things like that. But we all know ice cream, so we know we'll never eat a trash, break ice cream, probably. Right? But architecture is so abstract that we have many of those every day. Not only at the school, but we have also published and built many of those. And if we go back to OMA or BIG, we know their best results. They have also a big part of really bad projects built and finished. Okay, so there's not always an thing which makes you sure this will work. So this is what you do. So BIG is one of the offices which came from OMA, right? So they learn the art of diagramming. And if you follow it, okay, it all makes sense. So you have the existing, you put the maximum volume, you need more light, and then you open more because you switch it. We don't know why, but it is already one kind of a arbitrary opening because we need more space. It's too narrow, right? But we change things. And then, okay, we put stairs with even more sunshine. But then why do you need stairs here on the other side? Okay, whatever, stairs in one side and on the other, and then we have green, and then we have public spaces inside, and we have the perfect project. We need all the prices and being built and so on. Okay, this is something you have to learn diagramming properly because that explains very well things. But there's many logical gaps inside. It's like telling a story, and it's so well organized and so well told that you say, okay, that's okay. But then the architecture, many things don't make sense. It's much more like a formal, capricious things. And very often those diagrams come after. It's not really the real process of the project. This is how you explain the final result you have. So if you go, again, OMA, BIG, they're great at diagramming. Use them as a reference on how to diagram, but I wish not how to design, because BIG also has interesting projects, but terrible projects also. You have to see the real built thing. If I look, for example, I make a search on Frank Lloyd Wright concept diagrams, I find nothing. The only diagrams are by people who are studying Frank Lloyd Wright. Le Corbusier did some diagram, but to explain ideas, not to explain the full project. Mies van der Rohe, never. And those three are the guys who inspire Koolhaas and all those guys. Why? How come? Why they don't do diagrams? How could they survive? Of course, Frank Lloyd Wright, Le Corbusier, whatever, were experimenting, but they have very clear aim. In them, the inner reason of the project was much stronger than the formal result. They were experimenting, and the result was always the shape, the form was the result of the whole process. And they have a consistency no any of those offices have. From the basic plan to the details, furniture, whatever, they're all consistent with the same idea. And that's something we kind of we lose in this kind of very much mass-produced industrial design process. The advantage of that massing and that kind of a fragmented design process is that people really do not know about the rest. You become massing a specialist, not people makes a diagram specialist, and nobody takes over design apart from the 2 or 3 heads. So there's not that consistency. In the end, the result could be good or bad, but just because of the brute force, but because of the coincidence of getting the proper lock key, not because the start of the process was good. Again, how you will work in the future, it is your choice. If you are the owner or the boss of your practice, or will be depend on the office you are in. But it's nice you really are in the context and you notice one choice among many. If I have to choose, I prefer to be Wright than to be Ingalls, but that's up to everybody because probably English is richer. I don't know if happier. Okay, so much for that. So this is what I said. I had prepared something on concept, but I didn't find all those things. That kind of the commercial concepts, which is another talk, right? But this is about process, right? The way we insist, and this exercise is very demanding because you have to deal with program, serious program. You have to deal with the concept, with the context, which is very complex context. You have to deal with an existing building. You have to solve technical problem of accessibility and the structures. And you have to deal with the image. So that building has a strong facade, strong elevation. I have to interact with it in some way, right? So many things we have to deal with. And this working of the volumes machine or sculpture is one part of it, but with that alone, we will not be able to make a project. We have a question of a scale, of inner spaces. In this case, space is kind of result. The problem of working at a larger scale with machine is like you feel like a god who makes small things. You never get inside the buildings, or that comes after everything is decided. So one thing you will do, right? Because I commented, but you're trying by at least by Tuesday is along the whole process, visualize what you think is the main space of a building. The relaxed space or the cafe, or the trading or the teaching, real trees underground. So told, we are humans, we are not worms. We like to see the sunshine on the tree, right? So visualize that space, even though you don't have the full outside. So you can work in two directions. Now I will go fast into Palladio, because who memorized the Palladio's Villa Rotonda plan and section? You promised never come back if you don't. Okay, so that's unfair because just by coincidence, in my school, first year we have no semesters, we have years. So we have 1 year of technical drawing, the same year of architectural just drawing, right? And that's another year of drawing analysis, composition, aesthetics, and history. And then in third year, we started designing, which was a pain. And we have also in first year, a full year of functional geometry for difficult shapes, which is a big strike. So I never studied the full book. So I'm a bit weak in some advanced geometry, but you know, learn first is what remains forever. The gaps you get for some forever. I said already the Korean saying, but the habits of 3 years last until 80. Sesal porut yodumkaji. Okay. So what you learn in the beginning stays with you always. Whatever hole you have, whatever gap you have, for some reason it stays forever. Of course, you can feel it if you feel the necessity for that. And this is why I insist so much. 30 years is a moment in which still can fill gaps, right? So you will have more solid, more confident understanding of things. So in technical drawing, we work a lot with Palladio. So I had to draw Palladio until I just hated Palladio. I just brought some examples of what we did. Yes? Yes? I think, really? I think this is sharing now. Is it not? But this is inside. Oh, do you think so? Let me see. I can, let me log in Zoom to check, but then I have to silence the microphone. Yes, actually I should have logged in Zoom at the same time. We are Studio 3, start. And I should have another set of, yeah, maybe just another of those cables just to lock the microphone. Maybe it should be here. Thank you. Okay, so this is a collection. Each of those is kind of the A3 drawing, okay, hand drafting. And it starts from here. Let me see. Okay, it is shared. Thank you for letting me silence this. Okay, so I will just show fast. So it's the floor plan. This is hand drawing with a 0.1 and 0.4 thickness. So you see, this is interesting because it's fully symmetrical, but totally symmetrical. You see that all the long rooms are in the same orientation. So it's quite subtle breaking of the symmetry, like even in this case. This kind of sequence of spaces. Okay, let's put it full screen. So there's different ways of showing the floors, the ceilings, and then the volume, the shades. They would evaluate drawing by drawing. This was the barely pass. Okay, this is the detail of the full shade element. This is studies of geometry, composition, the building. This detail of it. This was just cut and paste some kind of elements we had. You have to buy them and then stick them. Okay, was kind of exercise. Actually, you can create a geometrical series to fit almost any shape. But clearly, Palladio and many of those guys use this kind of basic geometry. So this is just kind of a game more than real analysis. Plan and section, then volume, solid structures, shaders. This was one of the funniest to work only with the volume. This interior, we had a hard time to find how it's the shade of a sphere over itself. This is like the most advanced I can do in geometry. Okay, let's go back. And this is just kind of composition of the elements. That mark on the right here is my professor telling, how can you do this so dirty? This is like that. How can you do the spiral? So this was failed. But I didn't repeat it. I just assume it. Yeah. How can you be so dirty? That's literally this tiny. Okay. There's axonometric drawings. And then this is another villas about the studies of comparing the sequence of the spaces. So the lower part is interesting because it's drawing the space, not the solid. It's something you don't need to do like that, but expressing what is the main access central spaces and then the servant space of secondary rooms. In Palladio is very clear. That's something that you can do in many projects, right? And also including yours. So of course you have very complex atrium, but that tells you also here, without the columns, that kind of confuse a little bit, but understanding the shape of the spaces you create, only circulation, entrances, and so on, help you very much understand how you do. This is one of the things you learn based on these kind of compositions. And this is just a detail of those drawings. And then, well, just the basic, again, trying to get the compositional methods, circulations, inner walls, access, proportions, and then room by room. Abstract elements, and back to the beginning. So now we know Villa Rotonda a bit more. Well, that was both like trying to understand the building, but developing skills of technical drawing. Okay. I think that was the fun part. I know I have more. Just let's be fast because we have not much time. Time is terrible. Why so fast? So I promised to show some of the project I used with the Corbusier painting. So it is here. This is already 5th year. Right? Our program was 6 years of architecture, so we still have 1 year to go. And those projects, City of Theater and Opera, were like about 2 months each. So I will go fast into the first. They are very messy because this is just how I took the drawings. They're not in order. So I will go fast and stop in which I think which is interesting. 97 sketches. Okay, this is just to give the context. This is the perspective of the Central Park in Madrid, Retiro. This used to be the Garden of Juan Palace. This is a view from the south looking north, more or less. You see a gate here. This is the east gate, the same Madrid's Tom de Moon. From here is the road which goes to Barcelona. Right? And this is lower part, this kind of hill. So it's kind of a hill here. So the problem was to create a cultural center. It was a city of the theater in the park, theatrical city, just to do with theater. So why not? What I proposed was to scatter pavilions around the park. So the park remains as a park, it's kind of small buildings around. And that's the idea. The lake existed. I put a library just near the main entrance. I would use a channel of water to put several pavilions, which would kind of reproduce different kinds of theater styles. And then finally, in this area will be kind of a museum of the theater, the landmark. I won't tell you the critic of this element. I was like a crucified on site, but with kind of border element, which I was thinking, okay, like creating many things on like a very, very initial idea, right? To have the urban context of it. And I said that would be fast. Well, there's another vision. This is existing astronomical observatorium. This is Prado Museum. This is existing botanical garden. So the idea was to continue that set of pavilions, existing elements around there. So this is the second level of project, second year of design. Actually, it's the third year. And this is like a working those in plan, large scale. The lake, the library, the access, the garden, the channel, the different pavilions, the theater, or the museum, and then elaborating. This is very much a style or Uri Hyunjong. Right. The Banyan Peel, the fountain pen, not defining very much, but trying to see how this kind of access ways and views could bring to walking through the park and bring some kind of discoveries around. This is that wall in the lower part, kind of create a kind of boundary, a border with a museum, landmark, and how could you make a whole program in a very thin element? So kind of experimenting with many things. How can you make a full program within a wall, a thick wall? You see postmodernism around there. This is 1982, maybe, 83. So it's the glory of postmodernism, and you cannot escape those things. Now very few people will do this kind of Roman Baroque gates, but at that time it was interesting. Okay, developing of that. Actually, it was like the raw space before the design. More project, already trying to find how the pieces would go. See the library, the park. Actually, it's kind of reducing the scale and working at a larger vision. This is already presentation drawing. This is more theater. I did kind of classical theater and experimental theater with a bridge over channel of water. Again, this is A2 size hand drawing. Well, this is like the minimal theater, but you see everything works. So the program is studied carefully in that sense. You have the circulation, the areas to prepare for the stage, the toilets, the communication, and the experimental theater is much more neutral. This is the section of the library. Let's go back a little bit because, oh, I didn't want to do this. Because we have many people are doing libraries. So let's go to some of the studies. Probably from here. Let's go backwards. So this is like a detail of some of the drawings we saw before. Okay, this was one presentation. This was my student number over there. Like selling what exists, the perspective, and some images of the elements I wanted to put. This is like a real pinup. So already had a program for the library. It was very classical, like Michelangelo Lawrentiana access. Curiously, nobody mentioned Michelangelo. Almost every year we have a library, have a Michelangelo entrance. Well, I did. With a long space, like at classical libraries, and then many wings just to comply with all the needs of modern library, with a garden, which will be part of the connection to the park and the children's library and so on. And then some front, again, experimenting with the wall as a building. This will be like a safe place for very valuable books with a front to the water. You see, plans, all plans section and the context. Even at very initial stage, you have to see everything. You cannot work only in plan. At least I couldn't. Here's the detail of that. You see this very defined design. At that time, I was doing Alba, one of my teachers, and they had this kind of a solution for the top lights. So I just copied everything and tried to make it work. And you see, this is very tiny scale. It's 1 to 1,000 scale. It's tiny. But you see, there's already some kind of, there's not any indication of what is what. But you can guess, well, there's, oh, sorry, there are letters, I lied. But you can see a small suggestion of furniture and things. So thinking more of how the space is used than really giving the labels. This was the landmark. This is the presentation. I was heavily criticized for this, but they say, okay, the section looks a bit better. The idea is to have a kind of light structure with kind of a planetarium on the top. It's kind of the theater of the universe. And then exhibition area on the basement. Let's have the section. Actually, it was done at 1 to 500. I didn't go beyond that scale because it was one project with 3 buildings to present. But again, this kind of exhibition around one central stage with the top light, the service elements, and then the additional programs with a cafeteria, which has kind of the stairs, so you can see the stage, have top light, and it's kind of a lounge, stage space, part of the museum. Come on, this is the things you are doing now, but this kind of possible solution. 1 to 500 is very much a diagram, but you see things are not so abstract. Right? It's kind of trying to have the feeling of those spaces of the use and how that affects the landscape. This was the end of the lake. So you have a kind of a space for the boats to go there, and the connection with the water would be also going around this space around there. Well, this is the plan I could have shown before. This is kind of a student night working. This is a machine room. So I thought it was cool to draw the machines. You can see this is not Kandinsky, but Malevich. But the idea of having just a minimum drawing to indicate things. You can understand the toilets without anything else. And this is the joy of working by hand. The density of the drawing is very much fit to the scale. But you understand other things. Even if I don't tell you the numbers, you might guess what is what. And there was a ramp. It was accessible before accessibility was an issue. It's the detail of the section. So kind of makes sense, right? And you have the water going to the upper part. This was copied from the drawings of James Sterling. You have people just going to the water. And this is the massing plan. And this was another project. Well, this is already final. So you have already the city of the theater. I broke this wall, the opera over there, Prado Museum. With an extension, I did all this way to the Prado Museum, but we will not go so far. This is the final solution of the library. Every floor plan, triangle. This is the obsession with Munari book as the entrance. Actually, this is upper floor. Let's see where's the lower floor? Yeah, this is the access. So you have a lobby way of triangle, just in the border of the lake. Children's space just apart with the garden near the water. Lobby where you can get to the magazines and so on, wardrobe, and then the control space to go to the reading room, individual study rooms. The counter for valuable books and the closest stacks, which is the wall kind of fortress there. So this is the upper floor. So things have the right dimension towards there, and wall is a thick wall. And there's the upper floors, right? So this is the access, the section. And this is all 200 scale. And the theater we saw before, and the plans and so on. Okay. So in this context, this was like 2 months. The following 2 months was to make this was the easy part, to make one opera theater. Well, I didn't show this in between, but you see this big change from that very classical building to the other, which has basically the same function, but it's a bit more relaxed. And you see also the difficulty of working with children in libraries. In this case, the solution was to take it out. Let's go to the opera. And this is also very messy, so I have to select the drawings, otherwise we'll never end. So this is like a starting, more or less. This is not the very first drawing, but this is telling you trying to fit. Actually, if you see this is very similar to the diagram I showed the other day of the news. I had a handbook. Here, the program was already set, so we didn't have to research it. It's kind of find out how the plan and the section can work together with all those programs. And you have the numbers. I think something was before that. Again, this is a Hyun-Chun style. And this is not really Le Corbusier, but well, this is a little bit like some of the later periods or Leger, Ferdinand Leger. Interesting painter. Ferdinand Leger. It's about a purist, not totally good, but interesting guy. Leger when you were in our studio too. Because he's trying to understand the program, but get kind of a way of making things. And the idea of this kind of organism, kind of living organism, is to have so many spaces which can just overlap to each other. So the idea was compacting maximum both in plan and section. You can understand more or less the stage, right? The hall, and then the all additional spaces around there. So it's larger vision of that. This was one of the Le Corbusier paintings I used as a reference. This is quite complex, but it was the interest of having so much complexity, but this kind of a grid underlying everything, this kind of geometrical order. And there is like almost every shape leaves thanks to this. The empty voids define a shape, but they're always overlapping over there. You can recognize the bits, but they're fragments already. So I thought this was quite interesting to work with. Another paintings, so to have this kind of, you see already kind of grid, kind of a geometrical order, star lines, and you see areas of calm, of almost emptiness, and areas of a lot of drama. This kind of balance, this kind of rhythm of intensity and calm, which I thought also for a complex building were quite interesting. And this was my painting already after Le Corbusier and after all the program. So this is the hall, the city stage, the 4 stages or 4 stages for the opera, the smaller hall. So I choose the way to have all the technical elements together, and then public come from one side to each of the halls, and the technical areas being from the other side. It's one of the choices you have. When you have 2 theaters, you have to deal with the techniques, right? And then these empty areas, the huge lobby. Right? Some things were trying to be playful, like the cafeteria was kind of a jar, things like that. So this was the starting point to make the project. You see, it is more simple than the painting, but you benefit from the painting structure from there. So this was the final render. It was done all to 1:500, which would fit the A2 paper size. So you would have the wardrobe, which kind of soft piano, the cafeteria, the very complicated areas to go to those rooms for the VIP, the director, and so on. you have the base of the structure. You can see this kind of double columns, or there's a kind of grid dealing with the full structure. Actually, the largest size are the seam and the hole. So this is like defining the dimensions. The artist area, I felt that most theaters are very ugly artist areas, like a really rooms without light and so on. So I thought, how about making kind of a small garden city with the individual gardens, so you can have air, can relax, and then can go prepared at the same level of the stage. Of course, they need to have their lobby, the organization, they're all, and then all technical rooms around. And then the problem to have the image to the outside. How do you frame this? So it's painting, let's pick a framing. Just to say how we made the entrance. There's intermediate stages working each of the little bits. So you see the result. In reality, you have to work hard to see how things work in 3 dimensions. The parts, this is what Steve does. But working the bits, but always have the totality together. Right? And using different techniques because the mood, pencil color, and the fountain pen is different. So you reach different conclusions there. The trials of the section things have to work. The use of natural light always. Well, this is previous stage to be totally technological. And we are repeating. So let's go fast here. I don't know where we are. Okay. I think we were here. It was repeating, but for some reason. Okay, so there are several stages on how this works, right? To find this is intermediate also by areas. Acoustic ceiling. This is like a landscape trial. This is elevation, so it's like a box with the access part, the opera theater. And some experiments on textile section areas. Then the full park, which we'll not see now. And the scale drawings to make things work. Actually, this is a section with the structures, the experimental theater, the mix stage, and things happening in between. Once you have clearly an idea of the structure and how things works, it's easy to work with the sections. And also, you saw the first sketches were with plan and section all the time. Most of the work was done in floor plan. Section came later, but everything was tested during the process in 3 dimensions. One of the latest sections. This is to see the detail which these things are work. So they started making clear the visuals work, and then the insertion in the garden. So you see, this is a building. How all this geometry can melt in a garden and be consistent, even though it is quite different. This was the final elements. Different studies, details, and the structure. It was not calculated, but it has 3 dimensions. So the one requirement was to make sure the structure worked. So you have a full diagram of beams, slabs, and there was even somewhere the basic calculations for the dimension of the elements. So this was not great structure, has some points. Right? Actually, this area, I'm not sure what I was thinking about. But well, it's a kind of system. This was not a strong point, but something you have always to be aware of. No matter how free you are, things have to be built. When apparently the professor said it was good enough, so I could rest. There was one more project which I will not show, but I showed you the experience with the painting, the cubism, the 3 dimensions, and they try many different things, working in plan and section, perspective together, working on the beats, on the whole, and so on. Stop here. And then we have to go to the part we said, which is important. We have to go to share again. Here, and we are not in Zoom, but in share drive. Okay, so in the team drive, I will share, it's not yet shared. This is the shared lectures. So Professor Lee usually speaks us about accessibility. Professor Song about some case studies. I will share also, not today. I give one of the lectures we gave already, I share with the others. And Professor Kim Yong-jae speaks, depends on the times, he has interesting talks, mostly about site research and so on, which becomes a bit late. So you have the American standards. 2010 is a little bit old already, but they are tough enough. Korean standards are published. You might find in internet English version of the standards. They're mostly based on the American adapted to the Korean space. Right? You can use European standards, it's perfectly okay, because standards have small differences. The spirit of accessibility is the same. Right? This is a very fast recap of just slides about the wheelchair, basic dimensions, ramps, and so on. Well, this is you're familiar with, so we don't need to repeat it. Only be aware that we have to deal with this. Right? And then there is an interesting project of Norman Foster for DEU, I think. Yeah, DEU, which was not built, but they have all the studies. So let's see if we can see it. Form follows building system. Okay. So about technology, so you have all the diagrams. So this is not concept diagram. This is telling about how the regulations limit your choices. So Foster is not OMA. They are practicalized. Those British are not the Dutch. Dutch make the business with this kind of commercial thing. British have a bit more clear intention of what they want. And Norman Foster will, well, I don't know how the office works now, but Foster was much more direct. So all possibilities, concept, and so on. So you see many examples, but this is basically variations of one idea which is already decided. So interesting things is, okay, all the study of the environment, but let's see if we can have a slideshow. This is all presentation drawings very much on Foster style. But I think what's important is that at the same time, you have already kind of urban studies, how people move around and the access from the underground and so on. You have some kind of image of the spaces, both urban, atriums, and so on. So this is the kind of thing, you don't need to go to much detail, but you have to decide which will be the greatest space on your building. You might have several, of course. And if you can have several, great, but I wish at least we have one design in the interior. Right? The same more is better. Usually you have a lot of floor plan sections and then no vision of the interior. Other than the render, which is just the whatever happens to be there with a lot of ready-made furniture and trees and people which do not think about the space, just the result. So at least one with this kind of, not to disturb because this already is quite advanced stage of the design. It's about explain almost everything about movement, interior spaces. Right. You don't need to have so many. An interesting thing was about accessibility because they have to deal. So they have all the technology. The moment the project is more advanced, you have more precise renders. And then you see this is a render, this computer render, but has no details. Yeah, you have like a just pure geometry with the joints. We have the modulation, very clever. This is what we speak of modulation. Have the floors, the vertical modulation for the glass, and that defines all the details of plates or curtain wall or so on. But there's not really detail at this stage. If you reach this stage, do the render like this. Don't start putting like a elements you borrow from some database and you have very detailed window, very detailed rail without really having designed it. Okay. So this is the kind of things you learn from those guys. well, this is interesting because they are making each floor with everybody inside, and but you see it's copy paste. It's kind of ant house. Not much stage, but okay, that makes sense. Another thing which is interesting is well, you have the detail. Again, I think this is too much, but no idea you have the scale of people, even in exterior elevations. And then another interesting, okay, the sections. So this is section and perspective, which you can do at quite advanced stage of the project, but still there is no details of things. What is not designed is not detailed. You need to see it. And this is interesting, this kind of a computer drawing with some kind of a hand pencil, but see how they put the people. This is not the best drawing I saw with people, but this is a way to show how people will use the space and how people move around. That has not an idea of the scale. And we have a lot of complexity. Shades help a lot to see what is solid and what is not. So there's many techniques here, which this is really old school. It's like in my 1980 drawings, but still they're effective, and you avoid making axiomatic perspectives, show a lot much more the mood of the space in this way. Oh, it was here. Let me see if I reach. Then you have floor by floor. There's some kind of a explanation. You don't need to do that, but obviously the Forster associates were trying to show different possibilities of that open space. When you have huge open spaces, you have to show the possibilities, the possible variations, at least one. Also, we are aware it's an open space. Then there's the model, very expensive model and very expensive photographer. Right? You can do this if you are Daewoo before they went bankrupt, and if you're Norman Foster. Otherwise, you can fake it. But the point is in photos, you can be much more realistic than in renders. If the model is good enough, you can hide imperfections of the model, but what you photograph is real. So you can use like a real sunlight, real background of the landscape. You can have even the trees. You can take the model outside and have the trees back. And in 10 minutes, 30 minutes, you can make like 100 photos in many ways. You cannot make 100 renders. And you may find well, you don't need to make 100. As we said with the lock picking, you have to make an intention. Before you shot, you see the photo, right? Not take any and then try to find a good shot. It's the opposite. You look around, so this is a good view, then you take the photo. So you have less to choose. To choose from 100 photos is a pain. So better, you have to choose whatever, right? And even if the model is unfinished and you don't have everything done, it's very easy to mask things or to understand it as it is. Right? So this is a good thing about this. So this is how you can show models. And of course, you have like now the renders, final renders have all the detailing in it. We need to reach this stage. But usually in finals, you submit the renders of this quality without the details. And then something is weird because you have very undefined space with very much defined elements. We have a very detailed design furniture, brand, LCD display television, and the plants with that space which is barely thought. And that's very strange. It looks like a kind of a salesman catalog of goods to sell rather than the space itself. So very careful with that. In this case, it's quite balanced. We have the attention on the space itself, not on the small details. There's the president's rooms on the top, and then some of the illustrations, images for furniture, materials, lights, night renders, okay, curtain wall detail. This should be for building systems. And then final renders of the exterior, studies, and then the accessibility. So this was some of the problems we had, or they had, no, they, about the accessibility. And they had not space for a ramp. So probably they relied on elevators. But there's an alternative to the stair, which is the stair ramp. So this did not solve the accessibility problem, but gave more possibility of people to walk around because you have very, very comfortable steps to walk in. And they did a mock-up. This is Mr. Foster smiling quite a few years ago. And Uri Jeu Kyosunim should be in the photo, but I don't recognize him because he was very young then. Well, the question is the real mock-up. You see very almost horizontal, but not horizontal. But that's enough not to force your foot. And the steps are comfortable enough for anybody to climb them. And then since they are very seldomly spaced, you have time to rest. It's not the same as a continuous stair. If you climb, when you do, because you will have to do also, you have to climb a Pukan-san, right? You have a lot of stairs, and they're all continuous. So after 100 stairs, you are like, because there's not rest. So this is why the rest space in the stairs are so important. Surak-san is worse. Pukan-san, Surak-san is a bit more on the east, more steep. So, but once you're up, you see the full area of Seoul on the other side. So you understand very much the geography of the city. It's very much inside. Now the weather is nice. So this is what I actually wanted to show. They have to deal with the accessibility. You have all the things, but you can always propose solutions, everything that will help mobility in many of the cases, right? Okay. And I think, okay, yeah, I think here, this is Tokyo actually. This is one of the first canopies done entirely in structural glass. This is Vignoli. Not sure this was Foster's office, but somebody did the consultancy for this. If you go to Tokyo, you can see it. It's a bit more dirty, but it's there. And this is the designing of the glass alone elements and all the calculation. Moment diagram. Wow. So you see one ramp is calculated as a normal beam, no problem, with a small, it's not totally rigid. This is where the moment is a bit smaller. This is depending on the design of the joint. You all passed the structural calculations, structural physics. You passed them also, Steve? Structural? Huh? Barely did, like everybody. Okay, so this is the high quality renders of different elements around there. Okay. So I think, and this is the portfolio of Foster, telling how great they are. And this was, I think this is the foundation of this building. It was stopped because the DU went bankrupt at this time. So the project stopped, but it's interesting they started doing the construction. I think this is crazy. So I think they went barely over the grade. Who of those is Professor Lee? I cannot, Professor Lee Jiu. I cannot recognize him. Ah, this one. It's maybe a few years ago. Okay. Kudos for him. It's very kind of him to share all this material because usually it's not published, and it's just nice to see the full collection. I will share the full PowerPoint so you can see the details, and you can use them when you have building systems later to copy and so on. But the important thing is to understand the logic of things. Also, we went very fast. You will see how Foster worked in the context of how we make a process design. I'm sorry to put my poor students' works to next one Foster, two different worlds. But I think it's also nice you see student work because I was suffering the same as you're doing now, right? Also, I was like 2 years more in the school, so I had a bit more confidence, more experience on that. But not so much, actually, it was like yeah, second year, so it was like a third year of design studio. So not so much advanced, not so much advantage. Okay, so much for today. Actually, it took like a half an hour more than I wanted, but I hope you took good notes because the exam is getting close. You have to memorize already Palladio and Colin Rowe text and Kandinsky and Bruno Munari and Erzberger. There's so many things to study. Any question about this? So you have a design process. And you mean landmark? Well, that's a big issue. So landmark is not only attractive, it's to give a reference. Landmarks can be scary also. You can so nowhere get monumental special. So the anti-landmark, you only recognize brand and the block number. Everything else is all the same. Tangi is the Tangi. Okay. So this is the anti. Right. And most residential areas work at that. Then areas of town have more personality. So if you walk, for example, Chonglo, you have some building, right, which is kind of well, Gwanghwamun is clear because you see it later, right? Then you cross probably Kumho. You have the museum of the city, so distinguish. When you are between Uljiro Sanga to Tongdaemun, it's very much the same. You find the Seonsanga and Jongmyo, it's important point, but in between it's very similar, so there's not really landmark there. But Tongdaemun is a big. We have a Dongmyo. Then Dongmyo to Chongyali is also quite difficult because it's same with the highway, one of the neighboring Kosokdors around there. So that's also some of the streams. So there's elements which will let you recognize like accents. Doesn't need to be always a monument. In the case of the, this is the recording. It's not because of me, because we can see it from class. In the case of the project I showed, that landmark, this is the northern part, huge. So that's a bit more easy to things. And that the south part, the less, well, we don't have the, but you have to believe me. The part of the Tongdaemun is very dense, very urban. The other part was like a hill. It was almost not organized. It's a very new construction. So you need to have some kind of personality. But all my attempts were heavily criticized. I was very much advised. It's like the interest of the project goes down a lot. It's like a fluffy idea. Section was technical, so the professor said, well, this is, maybe we can start with this. But that image was like a very much like what's the local artist piece of art, which is kind of second quality thing. So making a landmark and monument is very difficult. Of the massing approach, to make a piece of art, the abstract mass, you have to be a real sculptor, and we are not. We don't have this training. And sculptors have a hard time to make this abstract sculpture. So you have to study them to make that. So I see a danger there. And I noticed here. So to make the beautiful object, you have to be really artist and make the element good enough. Okay, more difficult questions? Yes, I know when the break, but other questions, the other kind of questions. So let's have the break. Back at 4:10, and then we destroy your work. Not destroy, we help you with the continuation.